Hi, I'm Addison K. Witt, Poet Laureate of the Defense of Democracy and host of this podcast. The attack on America's public school system isn't slowing down, but neither are we. Here you'll meet authors, educators, students, and defenders from across the country who aren't just sounding the alarm, they're answering it. You'll be informed, you'll be moved, and if we've done our job right, you'll be ready to stand with us. This is the Defense of Democracy podcast. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to the Defense of Democracy podcast. I'm your host, Addison K. Witt. I'm Poet Laureate for Defense of Democracy, and today I'm joined by Dr. Christine Emeran, Director of the Youth Free Expression Program at the National Coalition Against Censorship. Christine brings an extraordinary background in nonprofit leadership, international research, and academic teaching. Her work has taken her from UNESCO in Paris to classrooms across New York, exploring how young people around the world find their voices through activism and creative expression. Christine, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Well, I'm so glad to have you here, and let's get right into the conversation today and find out a little bit more about you. So could you share a bit of your background and tell us about your work in youth activism and free expression?
Certainly. Thank you again. In terms of my background, I grew up in the Midwest and I have a doctorate in sociology, and my specialization has been on social movements and studying how movements work around the world has been of interest to me. It's been a passion. So over the years, I've met countless young people who have stood up. Oftentimes, we see that it's been at great peril for freedom and human rights. And for me, their courage and conviction in terms of ideals of democracy have deeply inspired me, as a human, as a researcher, and many of them that I've met in my research and my travels see the world, more clearly than those that are in power that tend to have more, kind of an old perspective on, society and also its, kind of its function in terms of, liberties. Sure. And I've seen that many of them, see the world differently than those that are in power in those countries. And also they have an ability to organize, to be to find a way to organize and push for change that shaped my work and also purpose. So sharing their stories, like through publications, through conferences, and through public speaking, is kind of how I contribute to that broader movement, for social change.
That's very interesting. Thank you. And I wasn't expecting you to reference or talk about the great peril that some young people have experienced in their activism and speaking up. I think you said a bunch of things there, a lot of things that were very important, particularly as the world evolves, as people change. Young people have new perspectives, new ideas, new ways of seeing the world as it's evolving. And later, I want to get into some of the specifics of how that our thinking process changes over time, how activism in the past is different from activism today. Before that, however, I want to ask, where does the passion to work with young people come from?
I think for me, I feel like I'm a child at heart. So for me, I always root for the underdog. I always felt like, the one that's sitting, by themselves, those are the kind of people you kind of reach out to. Those are the kind of people that you develop, lifelong friendships with. And those are the ones that have the most interesting stories. And you see over time have made a difference in their lives and others. So I think for me, I'm always looking for uplifting those that, need help.
Do you see working with young people as a calling, or did it develop naturally through your research and your professional journey?
I think it's definitely both. I've always been driven to global issues. As I've studied and lived abroad, I found myself drawn to youth-led activism because it was very innovative in terms of pushing the envelope forward. And that to me, gave me hope in terms of there is a possibility for change. And it seems like the change is happening with the young people and students in universities or students at large. And so for me, working with young people became a natural extension of the research and also my personal values.
Interesting. I asked that largely because of my own work. I worked in Los Angeles and Hollywood for many years as a acting teacher to thousands and thousands of young people. And it was some of my greatest work in terms of personal satisfaction and accomplishment, because you're impacting people's lives, not just for today, but for the future. And a lot of the work we did pertaining to actors was soul searching, finding out who you are. What is it that you want? Naming it and claiming it, and what kind of person you would become. While there were many, many people that went on to become working actors, very successful in their careers, there were many, many more people that went into other areas of expertise and life, world travel, to watch those people who want to just volunteer in other countries and help and become dentists themselves, and then go and give their time and resources to help people in less fortunate circumstances around the world, has been my greatest joy to see that. And I agree with you. I've always worked with young people, even as a teenager, vacation Bible school, always working with the kids and helping them. And then to actualize that as an adult, continuing that work. I felt at one point I did get a little bit old for acting with young people because there's a lot of energy required. But I really appreciate what you have to say and coming from that perspective. Let's pivot a little bit. I know that you studied movements like March for Our Lives and political activism in Ukraine. From your perspective, what does protest really mean? Define protest for us.
For me, I think it's an expression of rights. Especially when the rights are denied, they come out more strongly in terms of finding out who you are and where you stand. It's also about raising awareness and building solidarity. With a group of fellow students or others that feel the same as you, and also imagining kind of a collective imagination of a better future. So at the core, it's also protest. I see it as democracy in action.
Democracy in action. And I guess what I'm wondering, I'm not going to necessarily insert my ideas here, but is protest, when as we as people, is that something that is innate, or is it cultivated by necessity and circumstance?
I think most oftentimes when I've seen it, it's always a response to some type of injustice or like oppression or something that's happening. Some people are drawn to activism prior to that through like civic involvement. So they may already be, very much involved in civic life through associations or groups of volunteer work, while others might be pushed into it after experience some type of repression or denial of rights. So sometimes it's also about standing in solidarity. It may not directly impact you, but you may find that you might recognize it's a shared humanity that's out there in terms of human rights, and choose to act anyways.
Sure. And what role do youth-led protests play in pushing societies forward? And how do they differ from older generations? I remember I made a TikTok post several months ago about some political issue going on in Washington, D.C. And I felt that the response to the issue was um, aligned with protests and actions that were taken 60, 70 years ago. And I thought at the time, comments that I was making centered around, you're using an old playbook, and your opposition knows your playbook, and they have acted accordingly, but you're still using the old playbook. So I think it's very important, particularly when we're talking about young people and how they may choose to protest or respond differently today.
Absolutely. And the what works in the past is something to keep in mind, to in terms of like the strategies, is that there's nothing wrong with looking at the past and using tactics. And as we know through research, nonviolence, nonviolent collective action is effective, right? Through, authoritarian governments throughout the world, when it's not violent and you're collecting together, that tends to be, the ideal in terms of pushing for change. In terms of these youth movements that we've seen, they often bring urgency to issues that others might want to ignore, like gun control or, the economic crisis during the Occupy movement in terms of like the inequalities of wealth. They push tough, conversations into like the public sphere. The media starts to cover these issues, even sometimes before society is ready, like the Black Lives Matters movement. So historically, students have been, catalysts for change, and that's still true today.
Even before the society is ready, that right there, that alone, even before, and I think sometimes when we see pushback from particular groups, whomever they are, it's easy to forget that someone has to lead. Someone has to go out there and make decisions and choices and act upon them. And that is in part what moves us forward, what helps to create the change, because someone listened to, whether it's that voice or that movement inside of themselves, galvanized enough people to come on board and go out there. And sometimes it's even just an individual who stands up for something and it has a resonance. Others pick up that feeling, that thought, that drive, and join together. For those who may not know, what is your mission of the National Coalition Against Censorship?
Oh, certainly. Our organization is in its 51st year. The National Coalition Against Censorship, NCAC, is, in terms of mission, defends the right for free expression in education, art, and cultural institution, as well as civil society. My program that I lead is the Youth Free Expression Program, and it's designed to empower young people to understand, defend, and exercise their First Amendment rights, primarily in K-12 in schools.
And why is that area, K through 12 in school? A lot of the conversations I've been having lately center around young people and K through 12. Why is that age group so critically important?
Well, I think in terms of like the age group, in terms of our constitution and rights, public school students have rights. So therefore, our organization provides them, rights in terms of, rights to access information, rights to be able to express themselves in terms of dissent. So all of these types of rights are guaranteed as if, as a full citizen of Americans would have. A private school is a different situation, but for public schools, students have more rights than they know. And once they know it, they're able to protect them and, demand for change. Nowadays, we see a lot of educational censorship. So, students are at the forefront to speak up, for these rights at school board meetings, as well as, organize, protests or walkouts, to express their discontent with if their rights are being violated.
I have to say, you're doing the Lord's work because today it's very easy to criticize the lack of knowledge, the lack of understanding of laws, our Constitution, Bill of Rights, why it matters. It's when we talk about people being bamboozled or conned, it's because they don't know the laws adequately, or they're espousing ideas and beliefs that they've heard from media or wherever, or from their families, right? Information's been passed down through generations and what people believe, but it's not necessarily accurate. And so in order to have a more robust, educated society, which I wholeheartedly believe in, there has to be critical thinking. We have to know our rights and how to activate, protest, dissent, and to teach young people at that age and start to empower them at a young age will make a better, stronger society. Just a little bit of note about my own work in Hollywood. When I began, I had a passion for diversity. And there was an article in the paper at the time in the LA Times that galvanized a movement in Los Angeles because of the lack of diversity. Now, we're talking 30 something years ago, not our recent conversations, right? These things cycle around. And at that time, I started bringing on kids from every stripe, many kids from different parts of the world. And I had an incredible cadre of actors who were from every group, and they were all working. And I thought at the time, this is fantastic because I'm starting with young people, and there's a it's not a little secret, but it's just a reality. Many of the adult stars in Hollywood, many of them began as children, child actors. And some worked at an early age and over time built extraordinary careers. And by the time they're in their 20s, 30s, you don't necessarily, the general public doesn't necessarily realize they've been acting for decades, professionally acting for decades. And I thought having this group of diverse children would have an impact 30 years into the future. And we would see a greater diversity. And we do. We do in large part. Yes, it is because people are activated, there are protests, there are important conversations, but it's also because, and I'm not the only one, people like myself and others saw that our actions of today will impact the reality of tomorrow. Let's move on into how you empower young people to become advocates for themselves in the face of censorship.
Sure. We do this through several programs. We have a Kids Right to Read project that supports community as well as students when books are being temporarily restricted or banned in schools. We reach out to help students to speak up at school board meetings. We write advocacy letters, and we provide counsel to the school districts on how to improve their policies to have more accountability and transparency in the process in terms of reviewing these controversial titles that are up for challenge. Our second program is the Right to Read Network. We connect local advocates fighting censorship on the ground to libraries and schools to also help support those movements for when book challenges arrive, and even before, to educate the public on the situation in terms of where they stand in terms of educational censorship and book banning across the country. We also have the Student Advocates for Speech program, where we train high school students to defend free speech and also prepare them to lead future advocacy efforts through a school year-long program. And our last program is our film contest, where we allow young filmmakers to use creativity through their phones to explore free expression issues for prize money.
Oh, that's fantastic. The Defense of Democracy also has a film festival. And this past year was the first time that we included youth or young filmmakers who themselves were able to create stories centered around democracy, freedom of speech, what was happening in their own communities and neighborhoods, from their vantage point. And it was a great success. We got a wonderful group of young people that submitted their films. And next year we will do the same thing. So maybe some of the young people in your organization can also submit their work. What are you hearing?
Absolutely. Love it.
Right?
Yes.
What are you hearing from students today in terms of their fears, their challenges? What is it that they're hoping um, will happen in our democracy for our future here in our country?
That's a great question. Students are, concerned in terms of not having a lot of spaces to express themselves or engage in conversations that are difficult, in the sense of, having conversations with people they disagree with, because there are no spaces provided for them to do that in school, with, an educator. However, having this program, they find that there's finally an outlet for, for them to be able to express themselves with students across the country, talk to experts, and, there are no mistakes. They're just learning and understanding happening in these particular spaces. So what we found is these students that come to us, they're learning to be engaged, or they're already engaged. They're thoughtful. They're eager to learn how to make change. They're constantly telling us how valuable it is to connect with their peers, not only in their states, in their schools, but also to hear from experts. They're also gaining skills in advocacy that's cross. Basically, they could transfer any type of advocacy, that they find themselves in terms of their growth. Also, leadership skills. They're realizing they're not alone. There are others that feel the same. One student said it best. They said, "I learned skills that I probably wouldn't have learned anywhere else." So this type of empowerment is exactly what we're aiming to do in our programming and our work.
That's so good. And I'm glad that you're getting the kind of feedback that helps you move forward. It helps you assess what's really going on. Because when we've heard the expression, when we know better, we do better. When we have the correct information, we can address it. And it's great that this is an organization. I know there's several organizations now because I'm talking with so many people, and I've met so many young people here in the state of Texas that are truly extraordinary. And I know for me, myself, that gives me hope because I know it's not just here in Texas. It's probably rampant throughout the country, that there are a lot of young people that are very engaged politically and are truly paying attention. And because they are actively in school, they are pursuing education right now. That gives them a foundation where they can have conversations and really talk about what matters, whereas they may not be able to in their personal homes just because of the dynamics, right? Some families are great at talking everything through, but many, many, many are not. And so it's great that these are organizations that can help people make sense of what's happening in a changing world. In some of the previous conversations, we've been talking a lot about book banning and why the average American should even care. I want to switch it up a little bit today and ask the same question differently. Many people say, I don't read books. And if they do, they may read one book a year. I mean, we're talking average, right? One, maybe two. And most likely those are books in an area that they are already familiar. So they may not have a sense of why book bans are even relevant. Why should the average person care about banning books?
That's really a great, question and also observation in terms of the society and, trying to get the message out there. Because again, it's more than just about books. It's about our democracy here. When we think about when our government or, even school boards are deciding what you can't or can read, it is, kind of a threat to, your freedom, in terms of, getting access to books that you may not be able to have if you don't have the, economy to be able to purchase a book. So, and also, for those that don't have kids in schools, something to consider is that these bans that we're seeing on these books are basically tied to larger efforts to defund public education and also control access to information in terms of public libraries, in terms of their funding as well. So we should all be paying attention to it.
Thank you for that answer. That really encapsulates the feeling that I have, and I was wanting to go there because I want people to understand how important this matter is, how big it is, and how it relates not only to just banning books, but everything that you just articulated. Well done. So, in terms of, if you're able to offer any examples of, I want to go back to youth because that's a large part of your work, and see if you can offer some examples that young people are showing in terms of resilience or creativity that tells you that we're moving forward even in these difficult times. What are you seeing? Are there some examples that you can share with us?
I'll give you an example. We decided to do a campaign for Banned Book Week called Right to Read Night. And we chose the title Chains by Lori House Anderson to talk about, child slavery and to, make it as a national conversation. So we ended up getting I'd say probably over 70 different bookstores across the country and world. We even got a few international countries participating in this national readout to have discussions about, American slavery in areas where, this is part of, in the South, there are other areas where the schools are not allowed to talk about it anymore, or they've whitewashed it in the sense that, it wasn't so bad. So now people are having difficult conversations through a book, but feeling community to actually have, conversation why it's important for us to talk about it. Why is this book being banned? And what does it say about America and where we are? And what can you do about it? So we have our student advocates working on, these are organizations sponsoring events. We had a 12-year-old from Buffalo that organized it on his own with, congressmen, involved to speak about this issue. So for us, we, gave them the tools in sense of a toolkit, an idea, but it was a supportive community that were unstoppable. They had creativity in how they advertised this event, energy. So this week is full of events and commitment to, talking through, inequality in the United States and racism and, where we are in terms of legacies of, slavery. And it basically shows that, the fight for, for knowledge and, equal rights for everybody is growing. It's alive. This is just one story of, many things that these students are doing every day, from, running banned book clubs to tabling at events, talking to their peers at school about the right to read. Is a movement that is unstoppable. Students keep coming back to us, asking us for tools on how to do this type of advocacy, and we support.
I'm so glad as you're explaining and sharing this. I'm just thinking several thoughts going through my mind. Number one, it's just simply extraordinary that in America today that there are subjects that certain groups and societies deem dangerous to discuss, or we can't talk about them. We can't talk about some of our most recent history. And then my mind went to all the times that I sat in school, and I went to some pretty decent schools. And at the time, when and history was one of my favorite subjects. And so thinking back in terms of the information was provided, and sometimes it was very difficult, and the perpetrators of atrocities were never put in a favorable light, but it was history. It was the facts that we were taught. Of course, now today we realize that there's been lots of whitewashing. There's been lots of shifts and changes to a lot of history, right? It reminds me of a film I love called The Last Kingdom that was on Netflix. It talks of, and King Alfred is addressing a character named Uhtred, and he says to him, "You have helped me so much conquer." Now, this is fiction, right? But what he had to say is so important. You've helped me so much, but I have the pen. And as you look at all of these stories that I have written down, you're not included because I have the pen. So we know that those who tell history and the story usually are those who have control of the pen and or the system of education. And so this work, I cannot tell you how appreciative I am to have you here, just to have this ongoing conversation that is incredibly necessary at this time. I have no idea where we're going to go, but I know that when there are inflection points, I know that when there are reasons to stop and listen and pay attention to what's happening, it's important, not just for today, but for tomorrow. Is there anything that you would like to add before we complete our conversation?
Oh, absolutely. I'll give you some ideas in terms of like what you can do. I mean, you can join, a banned book reading club. You can, if you're a young person, you can write about, right to read in your state, for your school paper, an op-ed. You can even share your passion with others in terms of zines. So I just want to make sure that the young people know that your voice matters. We want to hear it. Everyone, that works in the free speech community loves working with young people, and there are many ways for your voices to be heard. In terms of like the listeners, if you want to help support and our programs, I invite you to go to ncac.org. You can donate. You can share our work on social media, and also help keep us to keep empowering the young people to speak up and make change. It'll make a difference. So thank you.
Thank you, and I'm so glad you mentioned Read Out Across America that's happening right now this October. Usually, I take a moment to highlight a volunteer here at Defense of Democracy, but today, in lieu of time, I want to take a moment to thank our entire Defense of Democracy team, the people who make these conversations possible week after week. And to you, Christine, thank you for your time and for the incredible work you're doing to empower young people to use their voices. For our listeners, if you believe in protecting the basic right to read, to think, to speak freely, I invite you to get involved with Defense of Democracy and with the National Coalition Against Censorship. Today, we can make sure that every voice, every story, and every idea has a place in our shared future. Thank you for listening. I'm Addison K. Witt, and this is the Defense of Democracy podcast.
Defense of Democracy is the only national, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting our schools and libraries from attacks by anti-government extremist organizations like Moms for Liberty. We count on listeners like you to support our work. If you would like to make a tax-deductible donation to Defense of Democracy, please visit defenseofdemocracy.org and click support. 100% of your contribution helps our work, including the production of this podcast. If you are a business and would like to learn about corporate sponsorships of the podcast, which start at $250 per month, please contact info@defenseofdemocracy.org.